Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is honeypots. If you hear the words honeypot, don't think Winnie the Pooh. A honeypot is the much more nefarious, fictitious computer identity, geared to lure men of influence and wealth into compromising cyber situations. The flirty honeypot urges the target, men, to click onto a link that then exposes their top secret material to the hacker. Honeypots are easy to detect until ego gets in the way. Unfortunately, many men fall victim to the ruse and place in danger the secrets they have worked so hard to develop and protect. Entire companies, even countries, can be compromised when someone is lured into the honeypot. Back in the day, the honeypot was a real person. She was a valuable tool in the world of espionage, way before personal computers and cell phones were even a glimmer in the eye of the real-life spies. When the beautiful young woman appears to be falling for a regular-looking Joe at a tourist hotel or bar, or even their regular hangout, she was probably a spy more interested in stealing their secrets than their wallet. When the world of espionage was king, it was easy to target an executive, an industry leader, or another spy with a honeypot. The target was often lonely, far away from home, and no matter how well trained, they were always vulnerable. The honeypot had one of several simple objectives. She wanted to get intel and information, or she wanted to plant a bug, or something incriminating on the target. As in most cases, her objective was to procure incriminating documentation, especially photos, on the target or subject himself. Sometimes the pictures were taken of the target with a beautiful young woman, or in a homosexual affair, in a hotel, or at dinner, or any place that looked inappropriate. The results of her lure were torrid enough to extort information and gain power over the target. Today's honeypots are virtual. They are on Facebook and LinkedIn. In January 2017, for example, a hacker group composed of Hamas terrorists successfully lured Israeli soldiers through Facebook and online dating sites. Israeli security detected the attack, and it was quickly and safely removed. But that is not always the case. A new honeypot has emerged, let's say. Her targets have divulged deep secrets to the contrived character in hope of getting closer, albeit virtually closer, to a fake profile. They have found the girls of their dreams, just like adolescents lured by the intrigue of the internet and the totally oblivious and uncaring about its dangers. The targets have no idea that the people that they are communicating with are modern-day hacker spies. Specifically, they are Iranian hackers. A group called Cobalt Gypsy is probably the brain behind this particular honeypot scheme that I'm going to describe. This plot involved fabricating a single profile on LinkedIn and Facebook. Her name was Maya Ash. She was 29 years old and lived in London. Maya was a photographer and was taking courses at the University of London to improve her skills. Her relationship status was complicated. It read, likes social media, and is a bit of a hipster, listens to indie music, looking for love, mainly attracted to older men, looking for men in executive positions, especially in high-tech and energy. That last piece of information, which should have been a dead giveaway, for some inexplicable reason, it never set off the cautionary bells or whistles. Maya, aka Cobalt Gypsy, searched and found targets. She made her first move on LinkedIn and then lured the men into less secure sites. In one case, she sent a target a picture for him to comment on and give feedback. The comments page was an Excel document that needed to be opened and downloaded from a more powerful computer, she said. That's the target's work computer. Doing it from work, she explained, was more important because it would make the comments on the photo easier to access, less complicated, and tech-wise, it would be simpler. The target fell for the ruse. Bingo, mission accomplished. The virus was launched and began cascading and infecting. The hackers could now listen and watch all the computers hooked up to the network. They could also use each computer as a microphone and a camera to monitor what was happening in the computer's rooms. The inserted virus then uploaded another more powerful virus, which removed any trace of the first virus and replaced it with something almost undetectable, while also covering the tracks of the honeypot invasion. Maya, this one Iranian honeypot, set out to invade executives and intel companies and governments in Saudi Arabia, the United States, India, and Israel. In the case described, the company's cybersecurity unit actually and eventually detected the invasion and shut it down. Israel repelled the invasion before it was actually started. Turns out that the picture of Maya was not at all fake. It was actually a Romanian student from her Facebook page. Iran is working hard to get an upper hand on modern-day espionage. The goal is to crack into high-tech firms that support Western defense and intelligence industries. This would give them a huge advantage in their battle against the West. The security systems of companies and governments need to double down on their vigilance. Just like in the old days of espionage, the best defense against honeypots is realizing that when a beautiful young woman approaches a middle-aged overweight exec, either in a bar or online, she's not looking for love. I'm also thinking about ISIS in Lebanon and Syria. Enough is enough. They've had it. The Lebanese army is planning to uproot ISIS from both sides of their border. They will be joined by Hezbollah, fighting ISIS from the Syrian side of the border. Assad's Syrian army has also pledged to be involved in rooting out ISIS, but the Lebanese maintain that they are not coordinating directly with Assad of Syria. The United States and Great Britain are supporting Lebanon's army. They have provided Lebanon with a variety of weapons, including helicopters, drones, anti-tank weaponry, radar, artillery, and even a few small Cessna planes capable of firing Hellfire missiles. Lebanon is amassing 3,000 troops in one little corner of their country in order to eradicate ISIS. Considering the enemy they are fighting, the number is not that overwhelming. There are about 400 ISIS fighters in that part of Lebanon. Just across the border in Syria, there are probably about another 700 ISIS fighters. An educated guesstimate would be that Syria and Hezbollah are bringing 4,000 fighters to the task. Hezbollah's leaders took to the airwaves and warned ISIS fighters that they will either die or be imprisoned. Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah's Secretary General, issued a warning to ISIS in a speech he delivered on TV, addressing ISIS by their acronym in Arabic, Daesh. Nasrallah shouted, "I tell Daesh that the Lebanese and Syrians will attack you from all sides, and you will not be able to resist and will be defeated." For extra emphasis, he added, "If you decide to fight, you will end up either a prisoner or dead." ISIS hates the use of the Arabic acronym Daesh. They hate it so much that they have cut out the tongues of Muslims daring to use it. Their aversion stems from a word play. If you place the emphasis on a different part of the word, Daesh means a traffic accident, also a mistake. The wordplay is significant. Over the past few years, many cartoonists have actually had a good time with ISIS Arabic name and comparing it, the terrorist organization, to a car wreck totaling the Arab world. I've even shown some of these cartoons here on this program. The assault against ISIS is not just a wordplay. Lebanon and Syria will initiate a coordinated force. There will be Lebanese losses, but the Lebanese will ultimately succeed. Ultimately, ISIS will be dislodged and destroyed. The offensive will take place in and around a series of villages that have been held captive by ISIS. The Lebanese side and the Syrian side both have experience and training. Now, thanks to the United States and Great Britain, the Lebanese fighters also have powerful firepower, and a lot of it. The Lebanese have better weapons than their Syrian Hezbollah counterparts, whose weapons and equipment have come to them courtesy of Iran and Russia. The United States has been investing in Lebanon for quite some time. The U.S. Embassy spokesman in Lebanon says that the United States has provided $1.4 billion to the Lebanese army over the past 13 years. That amounts to about $100 million a year. Weapons and firepower aside, ISIS excels in another crucial aspect of warfare: intimidation. ISIS fighters intimidate locals, not just the local villagers, but also local fighters, local soldiers. Ruthless, war-hardened soldiers and fighters for Hezbollah are intimidated by ISIS. Even when outnumbered by 7 or 8 to 1, ISIS has successfully inflicted serious damage on locals and on offensive forces. Right now, ISIS controls about 150 square miles in Syria and Lebanon, about 2/3 of that in Syria and 1/3 in Lebanon. When the fighting is over, that land will simply return to its respective countries. The good news is that ISIS will be out of the area. The bad news is that Hezbollah will move in to fill the void. Admittedly, that won't impact Lebanon or Syria, but it will impact dramatically and dangerously impact the neighboring Israel. Hezbollah will be entrenched on both sides of the Lebanese border, and they will be on both the Lebanese side and the Syrian side. They will fill the power vacuum left in the local villages. Israel is watching this move to uproot ISIS very carefully. It is very important to get ISIS out of the area and far from the Israeli border. The entire Middle East, even Hezbollah, understands the truth. And honestly speaking, the success that Hezbollah and the Syrians have had already in their battles against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria have had significant psychological benefits for local fighting. But, as the old saying goes, be careful what you wish for. There are far more Hezbollah fighters, tens of thousands of active fighters, than there are ISIS fighters. These Hezbollah fighters have years of battle training. They already have hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles. And after evicting ISIS, they will acquire even more. And when they move into the villages, they will deploy their rockets and face them towards Israel. Which would Israel prefer in its borders, ISIS or Hezbollah? ISIS is evil and awful, but so is Hezbollah. When it comes to their hatred of Israel and mission to wipe the Jewish state off the map, what separates one from the other is that Hezbollah is more predictable. Forget that they have more experience and more firepower. Hezbollah has more discipline. And that's what makes Hezbollah, in this contest, the preferred enemy for Israel. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. We're going to discuss 2 columns today, both from the New York Times. First up is a column by an op-ed contributor named Moshe Temkin. It was published on June 26, 2017, and it is entitled Historians Shouldn't Be Pundits. Temkin is an associate professor of history and public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Now, it should be clear that this piece hits very close to home. I am a historian. I am also a pundit. But Temkin is not actually speaking to me. He's talking about those who sit in the academy and research. The main part of his argument is that historians have difficulty reducing the nuance of their analysis for popular consumption. This is how Temkin begins his essay. Donald Trump might be disastrous for most Americans and a danger to the world, but he has been a boon to historians. The more grotesque his presidency appears, the more historians are called on to make sense of it, often in 30-second blasts on cable news or in quick-take quotes in a news article. As a historian, I'm glad to see my profession getting some much-deserved publicity, but I also worry about the rapid-fire, superficial way history is being presented, as if it's mostly a matter of drawing historical analogies. The result is that readers and viewers get history lessons that are often misleading when it comes to Mr. Trump and shed little light on our current travails. This is partly because this is not what historians should be doing. We teach our students to be wary of analogies, which are popular with politicians and policymakers who choose them to serve their agendas, but often distort both the past and the present. Temkin gives several important examples of using historical analogies. This first example is how Trump is like Huey Long. His answer is that yes, there are some similarities, but there are many more differences. He continues. To take just one example, during his campaign, Mr. Trump was frequently compared to Huey Long, the Depression-era governor of Louisiana. Sure, there are similarities. Like Mr. Trump, Long ran in the name of the people, attacked the establishment, and was labeled a demagogue and a fascist by his critics. But the differences are even more important. Long was self-made, a genuine populist who took on powerful interest, and as governor was responsible for the building of roads, bridges, hospitals, and helping the poor. He never engaged in race baiting, astonishing for a populist Southern politician in that era. And the point isn't that Mr. Trump is or is not like Long, and he's not. It's that the analogy is meaningless. Temkin concludes saying that there are important questions for historians to ask and answer. He says, here are some questions. How did a rich guy who never contributed a thing to the public good become a public figure? Why did his ill-informed opinions on everything from China to Barack Obama's birthplace matter to millions? How did private wealth come to provide such access to power and influence in politics? Why has xenophobia been such a force in a country built by immigrants? Historians have done illuminating work on these questions and are best placed to answer them. Trading in such complexities might get lower TV ratings than drawing parallels with prior presidents, but it would do a better job of explaining Mr. Trump and make clear that Americans can make a better history for themselves. Temkin is correct, and I would add, the TV ratings issue is huge for networks and sponsors, and the best way to get those big audiences is to exaggerate and hyperbolize. Next up is another column from the New York Times. It was published in the Sunday Review on July 8th, 2017. The column is entitled, My Son the Jihadist. It is written by Nicola Ben-Yahia from England. Nicola is the founder of Families for Life, a nonprofit organization focused on de-radicalization and support for families. There were several columns and news pieces with similar titles and themes that were published recently. This is one of the best of all of them. Nicola begins with some background. I gripped the phone, trying to make out the words on the crackling line. There was a moment of silence before the voice at the other end spoke. I'm sorry, but your son is dead. It was the call I'd feared for months. How was I going to tell Rashid's sisters that their brother, a fighter for the so-called Islamic State, had been killed in an airstrike somewhere on the Syrian-Iraq border? How would I answer their questions? I had none myself, nor anybody to grieve over. All I wanted was to hold him one last time and say goodbye. Now Nicola tries to show how hard it was for a parent to try to convince her son that he was wrong and that he should come home, that he should run away from ISIS. She asks, was he having doubts? Was this a way of asking for help, a way out? As I communicated with Rashid over the following months, through phone calls and texts, I tried desperately to win the battle for my child's heart and mind. I clung to the bond we'd once had. The boy I'd raised was gone. Yet, when we spoke, he never stopped calling me Mama. The boy was no longer recognizable. She described how he tells her that he was soon to be married to a jihadi bride. One day he told me awkwardly that the senior Islamic State leader had proposed finding him a jihadi bride. He spoke of his nervousness at meeting the young woman and the idea of marriage. He asked what I thought. What could I say? Despite everything, he still wanted his mother's approval. He told his mother enough to know that he was indeed a real ISIS fighter, one of the bad guys. But she continued to humanize him in her essay. She writes, I knew Rashid could be killed at any moment, and I grappled with the anticipatory grief. There is no parenting manual for this. Then I got the call. But Nicola is trying to figure out what went wrong, and more importantly, how to help stop others from becoming terrorists. She explains that, naively, perhaps I had passed off the changes in Rashid as his exploring and forming an identity away from his parents. It was the biggest mistake and regret of my life. But ask any parent of teenagers, would you have done better? I cannot bring Rashid back, but I have found solace in my work of helping other families with experiences like mine process theirs. We need a place where families can feel heard and understood and talk without fear of prejudice, judgment, and shame. It's in the building of trust between families, communities, and governments that we can find the resilience we need to defeat terrorism. This is a powerful piece. One cannot help but feel for the mother. She takes responsibility. Speaking as a loving mother, she also transforms her son, the terrorist, into a person. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to discuss two cartoons today, both from Dry Bones and, of course, published in the Jerusalem Post. The first cartoon was published in the Jerusalem Post on July 18th. It's a blood spot, and it's entitled Murder on the Mount. It draws a parallel between the murder of the two Druze Israeli border police on the Temple Mount, with the murder of King Abdullah of Jordan 66 years ago in 1951, in the same place atop the Temple Mount, also murdered by a Palestinian terrorist. The caption reads, "This is the 66th anniversary of the 1951 killing of Jordan's King Abdullah at the Jerusalem Temple Mount." At the bottom of the page, he continues, "Like the two Israeli Druze police officers killed earlier this month, he was shot by Palestinian Arab murderers." The next cartoon, also by Dry Bones, makes fun of Saeb Arikat, who is having a lung transplant in an Israeli hospital. Arikat was a close advisor to Arafat and is still the chief negotiator, as well as part of the Palestinian inner circle with Abbas. The cartoon was published on August 6, 2017, in the Jerusalem Post. The text reads, "News item, major Palestinian leader to have lung transplant in an Israeli hospital." Then the yellow cartoon caption reads, "Two knives for two peoples." You have two hands, each hand is holding a knife, an Arab and a Jew. One knife is covered with blood and reads, "Arab stabbing knife to kill." The second knife is held by a surgically gloved hand, and it's a scalpel. The caption reads, "Israeli surgical scalpel to save lives." In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. This is a remarkable story. Yoshua Elitzur has been extradited from Brazil to Israel. Elitzur, who lived in the settlement of Itamar, was found guilty and sentenced in Israel to 20 years imprisonment for the 2004 murder of Sa'il Jabara al-Shatia, who lived in the Arab village of Shalem. To reiterate, Israel has successfully returned a Jewish Israeli murderer who killed a Palestinian Arab in 2004. He's returning to serve his sentence. The process of extradition was long and it was expensive. Elitzur was arrested in Brazil in 2015. The Brazilians did not want to release him to Israel. Now Yoshua Elitzur will pay his debt to society in an Israeli prison. Israeli justice is interested in bringing all people who flaunt the law to justice. This dictate cuts across the board. In the view of Israeli justice, Arab lives are just as important as Jewish lives. Another Hamas drone fell in Israel recently. It was not shot down, it just fell from the sky. The IDF found it, and they are investigating and evaluating the drone. There's been numerous Hamas drones that Israel either shot down, tracked down, or fell onto Israeli soil. As a rule, Israel permits drones to fly over Gaza, but in principle, they target drones when they cross over the Gaza border into Israel. Hamas uses the drones as a tool to monitor Israeli movements, fortifications, even security features on fences and border crossings. These drones are very small and inexpensive. They can even be bought on Amazon. They're outfitted with cameras that relay their pictures back to a computer in Gaza. These small drones fly low, so they're hard to intercept. Larger drones, on the other hand, are targeted by helicopters or planes. No doubt about it, Hamas is getting more and more sophisticated in how they collect intel. Neda Amin, an Iranian blogger, journalist for the Times of Israel, has been granted the special circumstances visa to enter Israel. Amin left Iran in 2015 and has been living in Turkey. Now she is spending her time in court, fighting the demand from Iran to repatriate her and bring her back to Iran, where she will certainly stand trial for the crime of blogging. Neda Amin received UN refugee status in 2015. She's appealing to other nations to take her in. As a rule, Israel does not give visas to Iranians unless they're Jewish. But the Interior Minister, Aryeh Deri, has made an exception. He said that Amin's life is in danger because she writes for Israel. The situation was brought to his attention when the Israel Journalists Federation appealed to Deri on behalf of Amin. Deri responded immediately saying, quote, "This is a journalist whose life is in real danger," unquote. He continued, quote, "Given the clear humanitarian circumstances, I authorize her entry without delay," unquote. We hope that Turkey will permit her to leave, given that there have already been several Iranian hit squads that have executed Iranian expats in Istanbul. Time is of the essence. She did not make her original flight to take her to Israel. But 2 days later, she actually finally did get to Israel. She made her flight and was ferried safely to Israel. People are up in arms that special advisor to the Middle East for US President Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, said that, quote, "There may be no solution to the Palestinian-Israeli situation." Kushner's comments were leaked from an off-the-record briefing on the Middle East with congressional interns. The interns were warned not to leak anything from the briefing. Actually, Kushner's insight is refreshing. Most serious analysts have already said, at one time or another, that there may not be a solution to the conflict. They have come to the conclusion that the best that can happen is a slow improvement towards a better situation and a better status quo. The idea that a magic wand can bring the parties together is nothing short of insane. One of the most important goals must be to improve the lives of Palestinians and Israelis. That can be achieved without real political resolution. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know that ransoming captives is a great mitzvah in Judaism? I mentioned an Iranian who was swiftly ushered to Israel to safety before she could be sent back to Iran and be imprisoned for writing a blog for an Israeli website. This idea of ransoming captives is called pidyon shvuin. It's ransoming, freeing, redeeming a captive. And it's a commandment so powerful that it's called a mitzvah rabbah in the Talmud, a great mitzvah, because captivity is viewed as even worse than starvation, according to the Talmud in Baba Batra. The Rambam writes that, quote, redeeming of captives takes precedence over tzedakah, supporting the poor or clothing them. There is no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives, for the problems of the captive include being hungry, thirsty, unclothed, and they are in danger of their lives also. Ignoring the need to redeem captives goes against Torah laws. He continues to write this. This is actually right out of the Rambam, right out of Maimonides. Do not harden your heart or shut your hand against your needy fellow, which is one major law. Another law, do not stand idly by while your neighbor's blood is shed. Another law. And it misses out on the opportunities, he says, of performing other laws of the Torah. You must surely open your hand to him or her. You must love your neighbor as yourself. Rescue those who are drawn to death. And then in Proverbs, it says, there is no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives. This is articulated clearly in the Rambam in Maimonides. The Shulchan Aruch actually even continues further. Every moment that one delays in freeing captives in a case where it's possible to expedite their freedom is considered to be tantamount to murder. This is a mitzvah which has huge implications. But what are its limits? The Mishnah says the limits go all the way until tikkun olam, but we don't really know what that means. More importantly, there's a big debate amongst rabbis for centuries as to how much to pay, and should one pay the ransom itself. There was a significant argument between Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and Rabbi Shlomo Goren, chief rabbi of Israel, as to whether one should have exchanged 1,150 terrorists for 3 Israelis. Rav Goren said no, and he explained that the price is too high, and that it would stimulate more kidnappings, and this fell into the rules of limitations of redeeming captives. Rabbi Halevi said, Rabbi Goren is right, but the situation required new rules. These were not thieves, these were terrorists. In the end, the prisoners were exchanged. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.